Mr. Sneddon.
We're now at that point in time where the Arvizo family is off of the Neverland Valley Ranch premises. And they're at, originally, their grandparents', where they were taken by Jesus Salas. And then eventually Janet Arvizo and the boys end up over at Major J. Jackson's apartment in West Los Angeles. The first contact between the co-conspirators and Janet Arvizo in their attempts to get the Arvizo family to come back to the ranch occurred in the early morning hours of the 13th out here and the 14th in New Jersey. And they occurred between Frank Tyson Cascio and Janet Arvizo. And there were 3 calls that were placed at right around 1:45 a.m., Eastern Standard Time. Between that call on that date and that time and February 17, when the Arvizo family finally returned to Neverland Valley Ranch, there were over 40 telephone calls between Janet Arvizo and Frank Tyson Cascio, with Cascio trying to convince Janet Arvizo to return to the ranch. Now, there is one particular conversation that probably will be of interest to you. And the reason that we can provide this information to you was that it was a tape that was found in private investigator Brad Miller's office when the sheriff's department executed a search warrant. And it is obviously a surreptitiously tape-recorded conversation between Frank Tyson, on one end, who is in New Jersey at this point in time, and Janet Arvizo, who is in Los Angeles at this point in time, and the family, who is not on the ranch at this particular point in time. The conversation lasted approximately 19 minutes. And I'm not going to go into the whole conversation itself, because you will hear it played here in the courtroom and you can make of it what you want. But the highlights of that conversation, I believe, are as follows. Frank Tyson acknowledges the high-pressure and threatening tactics of Dieter Weisner and Ronald Konitzer over and over again on this tape. Janet Arvizo is heard to complain about those 2 individuals. And Frank Tyson is over and over again heard to say, "They're businessmen. They're businessmen. They don't know about family. Don't take it that way." Tyson promises Janet, and he promises Gavin. When Gavin complains about these 2 individuals, he promises that if they come back to the ranch, that neither one of them will be there. In fact, he goes farther than that. He says, "They're already gone, and you won't have to deal with them, so please come back to the ranch, Janet." The third part of the conversation you will hear, that he is so willing and working so hard to try to get Janet back to the ranch during this conversation, that when he asks her what she's going to do this weekend, and she says, "I'm going to go to church," he says to her, "Oh, whoa, come back to the ranch. I'll take you to church here in Santa Ynez." He's in New Jersey, and he's telling her that. Tyson implores Janet Arvizo to do the video. Do the video and say beautiful things about Michael Jackson. He reiterates the scare tactics that we've heard from Miami and from the ranch, from Dieter and from Michael Jackson, from Ronald Konitzer. That it's dangerous out there for the family to be away from the ranch. That there are evil people out there. And only they and only the ranch can protect them. Come back to the ranch. He expresses to Janet, on behalf of Jackson, how much Jackson misses them. How much he feels that they're family. How much Jackson loves them and how much Michael Jackson wants this family back on the ranch. You betcha. He goes further than that. He reminds Janet Arvizo that when the tape is done, the tape they want, that there will be a trip to Brazil, and there will be pleasure for everyone. And that Michael Jackson, the defendant in this case, will join them there. Well, it doesn't work. She's not convinced. But they are persistent. There are more calls. There are 21 calls between Michael Tyson and the other co-conspirators, including Mark Schaffel. And between Tyson and Brad Miller, there's another 15. And there's numerous calls between Schaffel and the ranch and other people involved in this conspiracy. That the defendant is actively involved in this counteroffensive. I think I've mentioned to you already the testimony of Rudy Provencio about him being present during conversations between Mark Schaffel and the defendant. There are other indications of that. The fact that the defendant himself was the one who called his ex-wife and surrogate mother to his children, Debbie Rowe. And it was Michael Jackson that asked Debbie Rowe to participate in part of the Fox network interview. Chris Carter, Jackson's own security guard, and Davelin Arvizo will tell you that during this period of time, often they observed the defendant, Michael Jackson, Dieter Weisner and Ronald Konitzer huddled up in meetings in Michael Jackson's office. And that this was a consistent thing that was going on during this period of time when the crisis was raging uncontrolled. Debbie Rowe will testify to some interesting evidence in this case. She's going to tell you that her interview was also scripted, only a little bit different from the Arvizos, because they took her upstairs and did a complete rehearsal before they ever brought her down to be interviewed. And when she's doing the interview, when they didn't like her answers, they would stop the tape and they would tell her how to answer that. If you don't believe Debbie Rowe, you don't have to, because her attorney, who was present during the entire time, is going to testify that that's exactly what they did. They scripted that interview, just like they scripted the Arvizo interview. As part of the attempt to get Janet back to the ranch and part of the attempts to provide statements from the Arvizo family, Private Detective Brad Miller was sent over to the Arvizo's house on the 16th. This is now Sunday. And he is led into the house by the Arvizos, because Frank Tyson has told them that he's coming. When he arrives, he has a cell phone, and he has Frank Tyson on the phone. And Frank convinces Janet to give him a statement. You'll hear that. Because that statement is also on a tape that was seized during the search warrant of his office. It's kind of an interesting conversation, because what you'll see and what you'll hear from experts that are going to be called, when that tape was sent out to be examined by experts, that tape has all kinds of blanks in it, and that it was edited, and that it was stopped and it was started, which is entirely consistent exactly with what the Arvizo family will tell you. When Brad Miller didn't like an answer, he would stop it, he would erase it, he would go back, and he would tell them what to say. It's now been what must seem like an eternity to you. But it's only been 2 weeks in the life of the Arvizo family, because it's the 17th. But the school officials are getting very antsy. They're also getting pressure by the media. What are you doing about this? What are you doing about this? So the principal of John Burroughs Middle School, where the Arvizo boys were students, contacts the Los Angeles Department of Child and Family Services and lodges a complaint and asks them to look into the allegations of whether Janet Arvizo is a fit mother and what is the nature of their relationship between the defendant in this case and the Arvizo boys. On the 17th, the social workers from that department called up Mrs. Arvizo and said that they wanted a meeting, and they wanted to see the boys and the family. And the meeting was set for Thursday, and it was set for the 20th. Shortly after that, one of Michael Jackson's employees picks up the Arvizo family. She's finally decided to go back to the ranch. They take her back to the ranch. And when she gets to the ranch that evening, she gets out of the car, and who do you think she sees? Dieter Wisner and Ronald Konitzer. She's been deceived. She's angry. She's upset. She insists that they want to go home. They don't want to be at the ranch. They don't want to be around these people and they want to leave. And Wisner and Konitzer tell her flat out, you can go wherever you want, but your children are not leaving this ranch. And that's what happened. Security guard Chris Carter then took her in one of the ranch vehicles back to Los Angeles and back to Jay Jackson, Major Jackson's apartment. And he will describe to you the trip. And he'll tell you that Janet was upset, that she was crying. She had her head down, and she was praying almost the entire way to Los Angeles. During the time that the mother is in the car being transported back to Los Angeles, of course the boys gravitate right back to the defendant, Michael Jackson. They begin drinking. They begin sleeping in his bed. For Davalin, it becomes an isolation now. She's the only woman on the ranch and she's by herself in one of the guest cottages. What happens next is, when Janet gets back home, she then calls, a few days later, Frank Tyson Casio and says to him, I need the boys and Davalin for the meeting with the social workers on Thursday, the 20th. And it's at this point in time that the conversation occurs that I referenced earlier this morning. No children, no video. Give us the video, we'll give you the children. She agrees. And that's when the video is done. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about the video itself. Shortly before the children, now, you have to understand the children are at the ranch, and she's in West Los Angeles. And shortly before Hamid takes them to his house in Calabasas for the filming, they are brought into the residence and one last time Dieter Wisner shows them a script, a written script, and tells them what they have to say about Michael Jackson. The good things that need to be said about Michael. They're told, Janet is told by Tyson that if the family does a really good job in the interview, and if they do a really good job in talking to the social workers, that the family can leave the ranch. Do a really good job. Alright, so what happens? They do the video. And you're going to see the video. And let me tell you a little bit about the video right now. There are parts of the video that you can see are over the top. You will see Janet Arvizo and the children, particularly Gavin, very flattering, very bubbly, very out of character for the situation they're in. You will see the children say things about Michael Jackson that they will tell you are lies, that are not true. They will tell you that they said on the video that Michael Jackson, that they had his phone number at all times and could contact him any day or night. They'll tell you that's not true, they didn't have his phone number, and hadn't had his phone number for a long time. They'll tell you that's a lie. That Michael Jackson helped them do their homework. They never did any homework when they were there. In fact, their books were found, during the search warrant, up in a video room which is adjacent to the house. They never did any homework, much less have Michael Jackson help them with it. They will tell you that Michael Jackson never really helped Gavin with his cancer. That, in fact, Michael Jackson, after a short time period, had had very little contact with Gavin during his fight with cancer. In the beginning he was and did support Gavin. But in the later months, he wasn't around. He'll tell you that's a lie. What is the truth, though, is that both, at least insofar as Janet Arvizo is concerned, but at least insofar as Gavin was concerned especially, that Gavin's statements on that video probably express his feelings towards Michael Jackson at this particular point in life. And exemplary of that is the fact that you will hear that what happened when they left the ranch on the 12th and they got to their grandparents' house, that he blew up, that he threw a tantrum, that he raged, that he didn't want to be there, and he wanted to be back on the ranch, and he wanted to be with Michael Jackson. That was his attitude. And that was the pervasive effect of the defendant on this child of 13. As I told you before, the video was completed sometime in the early morning hours of the 20th. We're now at February 20th. We're now taking these children over to the residence of Major J. Jackson, and we're now talking about a fact that the social workers are going to be there on the 20th. Let me tell you what happens on the morning of the 20th at this apartment. First of all, before the social workers show up, one of the first people who arrived is a security guard named Asaf Vilchik. Big, hulking guy. And he's there to represent the Jackson team. And he's identified as a security guard. He's really there to make sure what happens. Also in the room at that time are some friends of the Arvizos. Actually Chris Tucker's girlfriend, who Miss Arvizo calls and asks to come over for support. There is a period of time in the room where the security guard tells Janet Arvizo that he wants the interview tape recorded, and asks her to hide the tape on her person, and goes farther than that, and he tells her, don't turn it off, because there's another one in the room and we're going to hear what went on anyhow. And you're going to hear parts of that tape. Not very much. Enough to confirm and to corroborate what Janet Arvizo tells you about what happened in that room, and tells you about that investigator, and tells you about that tape recorder. Now, the social workers arrive, and they're ready for their interview. And at that point, they're introduced to this private investigator, who's there on behalf of Michael Jackson. And they say to the people who are there, all of you folks have to leave, except for the family and the mother. And Janet Arvizo says, no, I want them to stay. And the social workers say no, because that's what she was told to say beforehand. Now, they're told to leave and they do leave, and then the interview proceeds. But before the interview proceeds, there's a disc, a DVD, and it's a DVD of when Gavin Arvizo visited Michael Jackson back in the year 2000. And you'll see that DVD. I'll play that DVD and you'll see what Gavin looked like at that time. And it's not a pretty sight. He was in the ravages of his cancer, full blown, at that particular point in time. The social workers begin their conversations with the family. And there are two aspects to the conversation. The first aspect is simply for them to determine whether these kids are being cared for properly by the mother, in this case, Janet Arvizo. That is put to rest almost immediately. I mean, these are social workers from Los Angeles. They see that these kids are well kept. There's no bruises, there's no scars. They're articulate. They're satisfied. And they write that in their report. Well taken care of. Fit mother. And then they get to the part where they ask about what happens at Neverland Ranch, and they ask about the kids' relationship with Michael Jackson. And the family repeats a lot of the things that were said during the video the night before, but they add some things to it this time, because now for the first time they're asked to give explanations for why the boys would be sleeping with Michael Jackson in his bedroom and in his bed that were never asked on the tape the night before. Now, for their part, the Department of Social Services workers apparently were not alarmed by the fact that there was an investigator there. And nor were they alarmed by the fact that when the children spoke, they spoke almost the same exact words each time in describing Michael Jackson. But then what happened was the addition of this information that dealt specifically with the inappropriate conduct. And here's where the family added some things that were pretty preposterous. If you know anything about the way Neverland Valley Ranch operates, and they could have been objectively determined to be not true, like the logs and the employees of that particular ranch. Statements by the family were the children were never alone with Mr. Jackson. There was always an adult with them. The children never shared a bed with Michael Jackson. Mrs. Arvizo specifically told the social workers she was usually up walking around the house all night. Not only was she not walking around the house, she was never in the house. She was in a guest cottage. And the Neverland Valley Ranch logs show that. Gavin Arvizo stated that his mother went in and out of Jackson's bedroom all the time and was always around to know what was going on. And Janet Arvizo, in fact, has never been in Jackson's bedroom, ever. Both Starr and Gavin deny ever sleeping in Jackson's bed with Jackson or ever having any inappropriate contact with him. Starr added to this, that his mother was always present in Michael Jackson's bedroom. Davelyn Arvizo, for her part, added that she stayed in the house and that she had a friend of hers from school staying there in the main house in a room down the hall, and that her mother always knew what was going on. Well, as I said, the Neverland Ranch records and the employees who were Jackson employees, by the way, will confirm that the truth, like so many things in this case, is quite different. The truth is that they never stayed in the house. The truth is that Janet Arvizo rarely left the guest cottage, much less walked around the house at night. And the truth is both Janet Arvizo and Davelyn rarely saw the boys, because they were with Michael Jackson. And the truth is that Janet Arvizo was off the ranch between the 17th and the 20th, and between the 10th and the 12th of March. And the truth is that the boys will testify that they were constantly spending the night in Michael Jackson's bed, and Davelyn will tell you they were not staying in the guest cottage. After the social workers left, the children got in the car, and they were taken back to Neverland Ranch. And Mrs. Arvizo was with Vinnie Amen. And Vinnie Amen placed a call to Frank Tyson to find out whether the video was acceptable and whether the interview with the social workers was okay. And she was told no, it wasn't enough. It wasn't good enough. And now you folks are going to Brazil. Well, on the very day, the 20th, records will show that Vinnie Amen took Janet Arvizo to Norwalk to get duplicates of birth certificates, and pay the money for that and pay for the expedited process of that. Those certificates, birth certificates, were picked up on the 20th. Detective Craig Bonner of the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department is going to testify in this case, and he's going to tell you about being present during the execution of the search warrant at Mark Schaffels. And he's going to tell you about what he found there. And he's going to tell you that he found a black binder. And in that black binder, he found information about the, and this is not me. This is the Arvizo, vacation, in quotes, expenses. There's also a floppy disk. And the floppy disk contains a complete printout of probably 7 or 8 pages of all the money that was expended.
Objection. Objection.
Reason.
No visuals.
All right. I'll take it down, Judge.
That's all right. You were just waving a paper.
It's a 7 or 8 page expense account. You're going to see it. You don't need me to tell you about it, but I can tell you that it outlines virtually every movement of this family with Frank Tyson and Vinnie Amen that was being directed from Mark Schaffels' residence in nearby Calabasas. Because you see what happens was, this family was taken from the ranch on the 25th of February, and they were put up in the Calabasas Inn, and they were put up under the watchful eye of Amen and Tyson, and a security guard was placed in the lobby to make sure they didn't go anywhere. That security guard is the same security guard that was present when the DSS workers from LA arrived on the 20th at Jay Jackson's place. Let me tell you about a few of the things that happened, quickly, between the 25th and March 2nd on the preparation of this trip of the Arvizos to go to Brazil, because I think you'll find some of it quite interesting. One of the things that was done is that Vinnie Amen goes to school, to the John Burroughs School, and checks the children out. And he pays $123 for missing books. And he puts on the checkout form that the family's moving to Arizona. And then on another day, he goes down and gets passports for the family. He has to pay extra money to get expedited passports. And when he goes to fill out the passports, he tells the government officials, the United States government officials, the custom officials, that the family is going to Italy or France. And then, when he later goes over to the Brazilian consulate, of course he tells them they're going to Brazil. And, in fact, the Brazilian consulate would not issue visas for them to go to Brazil without confirmed airline tickets, which were procured by MJJ Productions, through MJJ Productions' heir apparent, the company they always do business with. And you'll see those records. You don't have to take my word for it. You will find out that during the same period of time, the family's possessions, what little possessions they had, were put in storage. They were taken to Dino storage. They didn't know they were taken. They just know they were taken. They were moved, lock, stock and barrel, out of their apartment, and the rent that was due for 2 months was paid by Vinnie Amen. The monies that were advanced by Mark Schaffel out of the Neverland Valley Entertainment business account on the partnership between the defendant in this case and Mark Schaffel. You'll also learn when you see this document that the family was treated to some movies. They were treated to meals. That, in fact, Janet Arvizo was taken to a beauty shop for whatever you lovely ladies do at beauty shops. And that the boys and Davelin and Janet were bought clothes, because they didn't have any clothes because all their stuff had been put in storage. And there was probably over $2,000 in suitcases, because they didn't have any suitcases, and new clothes for the trip to Brazil. All during this time that they were at the Calabasas Inn, with the security guard in the lobby and Vinnie Amen and Frank Tyson there. Well, the mission was accomplished and all arrangements were made, ready to go to Brazil. And by the way, they didn't want to go to Brazil. You'll learn that. It was not their idea. And they are taken back to the ranch. And this is March 2nd. And the logs show they were brought back to the ranch. I don't think there will be any dispute to that. Now, let me just back up a bit, because I think you're going to find it interesting what the evidence will show in this respect. On the 28th of February, the defendant, Michael Jackson, is in the Los Angeles area, and the ranch. He actually flies on the 28th to Miami, Florida. Now, it's only 28 days, so we're now talking about March 1st. On March 1st, his family, with security guard Chris Carter, flew from Los Angeles to Miami. Okay. We have records to prove it. We can show who went on the plane. We can show the canceled tickets. We can show all these were booked through MJJ Productions. The interesting part about it, however, is that Chris Carter, the security guard who flew with the family on the 1st and arrived in Miami around 6 o'clock in the morning on the 2nd, an hour and a half later gets on a plane with the defendant, Michael Jackson, and flies back to LA, and they go to Neverland Ranch where the Arvizos are. I believe that the records from the ranch logs and the testimony from individuals involved here will show that from basically March the 2nd to March the 5th, that the defendant and the Arvizos were on the ranch together. That again, from March 9th until March 12th, when the Arvizos left for the last time, that the Michael Jackson, the defendant in this case, was present. Let me tell you how this all comes to a head. The boys are back at the ranch now. Janet Arvizo is back at the ranch. And many of the things that I told you earlier in the morning that I talked about, and I'm not going to go into repeating all those things. The things that had to do with the display of the magazines and the unusual sexual conduct and some of those other things, occurred during this period of time. And one of the things that I think that you're going to want to ask yourself in connection with the allegations in the indictment alleging that the alcohol was used in the commission of these offenses is, why would any adult give alcohol to a minor? But more importantly, why would any adult give alcohol to a cancer survivor with one kidney? And I think the answer is rather apparent. Based upon what I've indicated to you, the testimony and evidence will show occurred on that ranch between the boys and Michael Jackson, and what the ultimate effect and impact of it was on their lives in terms of their being molested, or Gavin being molested. One final crisis occurred on the ranch, if you could believe that. On the 9th, when everybody's back at the ranch, Gavin tells the defendant, "I'm worried." Why? Because I got a doctor's appointment tomorrow. And I have to take to the doctor one of these 2-quart urine specimens so they can check and see if my kidney's working okay. I'm sure you're thinking what he was thinking. Well, if you're going to show urine and they're going to do tests, it may show that he had alcohol in his system. And both the defendant in this case and Gavin were worried that that urine specimen was going to show that this child was being provided with alcohol. The defendant tries to talk Gavin into not going to his doctor's appointment, and Gavin says, "It won't do you any good. My mother is adamant. I will be going to that appointment." He's worried. So he calls his mother and he confesses to the alcohol. She's irate. Just livid. And she sends Davelin over to try to get the boys from Jackson's room. Davelin goes to the door and she pounds on the door and nobody answers. She goes back and tells the mother she can't get through or nobody's there. The following morning, Vinnie Amen is directed to take Gavin, Janet Arvizo, and the urine specimen to the Kaiser Hospital. When they make a stop on the way and they come back to the car, Vinnie Amen says that the urine specimen has been tipped over, the lid came off and it's been spilled. And there's now only a small amount of the urine left in the bottle. Of course Janet doesn't believe that because she's seen these jars and she knows how the lids go on them, and they don't fall off that way. If you've ever been in a hospital bed, you'll know they're the ones they put on the side with the caps. This is not something that comes off. So she's had enough. They take the child. and maybe for you, or some of you, it may have been enough a long time ago. But at least for her, it reached the point that, after the Kaiser visit to the hospital, she asks Vinnie Amen. In fact, she didn't ask. She insisted that Vinnie Amen take her to the beauty parlor. Not because she wanted to get a manicure or pedicure or anything else. But it was a beauty parlor that was located very close to the place where Major J. Jackson worked for the United States Army. And the first thing she did was she got there, she got on the phone, and she called him and asked him to come down immediately. And he did. And she refused to go back to the ranch. And she didn't want Gavin going back to the ranch. And there were a number of calls between Frank Tyson and Vinnie Amen at that time. And I can tell you, frankly and candidly, that Gavin wanted to go back to the ranch. And it was finally decided that Gavin would go back and she would not. And it was decided between, as you will learn through the testimony and the evidence here, that it was at this point that the plan was made and discussed to try on how to get those kids off the ranch permanently. And that will unplay over here in the next couple of days. Now, the other thing that happened on the 10th after the visit, after Vinnie Amen takes Gavin back to the ranch, is before they leave, Janet Arvizo says, and reminds him, "Listen, I have a court appearance tomorrow. I have a court appearance in my divorce with my husband. I need the kids in court. Will you bring the kids to court?" He says, "Sure." The next morning on the 11th when they show up to court, he's there, there's no kids. She's really insistent now. What happens then is, although the kids are still back in the ranch and the same things are going on, and some of the events that I described to you previously are occurring right during this particular point in time, the fact of the matter is, they're serious about what they're going to do about this now. So what they do is, Janet Arvizo calls Frank Tyson, and she says, "Listen, I'll agree to go to Brazil. I'll agree to cooperate. I'll make this an easy thing for all of you guys. But my father's sick and these children need to see their grandfather before this trip. So if you agree, let the children come over for one night to see the grandfather. I'll agree to come back to the ranch and we'll go to Brazil and this thing will be a done deal." And Tyson bit. So what happened was on the 12th, the children were told to pack their bags and they packed their bags. And it's around noon, give or take a few minutes, or 15 minutes or 20 minutes, but it's around noon and the children are waiting to get in the car to leave. But one last thing happens. Frank Tyson comes out and he says to Gavin, "You can't take your suitcase." And they say, "Why?" He says, "You're not taking your suitcase. We'll give it to you later." The children get in the car, they're taken back to the home of the grandparents in Los Angeles. Later, when that suitcase shows up, all of his underpants are missing and his tap dancing shoes. Now, the family at that point is back away from the ranch. And they're not going back and they don't go back. But it doesn't stop there. Because what happens over the next few days is private investigators are sent down, telephone calls are made. They video surveillance the kids coming and going from school. They had to involve the security officer from Davalins High School because of the activities. Notes are slipped under the door, "Call Vinnie," all these kinds of conduct and behavior over the next few days. But Janet was adamant, they're not going back to the ranch. I think the way to conclude my remarks to you this morning are simply to talk to you about what Davalin Arvizo will tell you about her brother Gavin, and about what Davalin will tell you about Gavin's conduct after they left the ranch. She will tell you it was like having a stranger for a brother. She will tell you that a family that used to love and hug and touch and be with each other, that he wouldn't let anybody in the family touch him. He would go like that, indicating, "Don't touch me. Don't touch me." That he was explosive, that he was frustrated, and his conduct was not like the Gavin Arvizo that she knew before all of this stuff happened with the trip to Miami. She will tell you how he was silent and he was indifferent and how she wanted to have her brother back, and that it's taken a long time for her to get her brother back. I'd like to conclude by thanking you for your patience and for your attention to what, even in a profession which is known to be long-winded, was a very lengthy opening statement. It's extraordinary in its length, but this is an extraordinary case. And the lives of these people will be affected forever. And the fact of the matter remains that no matter how complicated the events that I have unfolded to you here this morning and as they unfold over the next several months in this trial, or how tragic it is to everybody involved in this situation, there's only one person responsible for the conduct and the consequences of what happened, and that person is sitting right here in the courtroom, and that's the defendant, Michael Joe Jackson.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sneddon. Mr. Sneddon, would you and Mr. Mesereau approach to the jury, which means you can talk to each other. Discussion held off the record at sidebar. That's a little more formal than me saying, cut it off. All right, Mr. Mesereau, are you ready to proceed, or do you need another minute to gather?
Could I take one more minute, Your Honor?
You certainly may.
Thank you. I'm ready, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
In unison, good afternoon.
I think it's afternoon. I get mixed up with this no break for lunch. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, my name is Tom Mesereau. And it is my honor and privilege to speak to you on behalf of Mr. Jackson. The prosecutor has outlined some very serious charges and made some very serious allegations, as you well know. If he is to be believed, Mr. Jackson conspired to imprison a family, abduct children and extort. If he is to be believed, Mr. Jackson molested children, and gave a cancer patient child alcohol to reduce his inhibitions and molest him. And I'm here to tell you that these charges are fictitious, they're bogus, and they never happened. Now, an opening statement, as I think you all know, is generally thought to be an outline or a preview of what's to come. It's often described as a blueprint of what the evidence will be like in court. I want to take it a step further, and I want to let all of you know that I think an opening statement is a contract. You make promises in an opening statement, you better fulfill them. Because at the end of the trial, the jury's going to know whether you did or didn't. And I say to you right now, I am going to make some promises in this case, I am going to fulfill them, and I want you to judge me accordingly at the end. These charges are fake, silly, ridiculous.
Your Honor, I'm going to object as argumentative.
Sustained.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have an organized opening statement for you. I'm going to take you through various topics. Who Mr. Jackson is, what Neverland is, how he met these people, what kind of lives they have led. But I've decided, in light of what was just said, to start off with a couple of issues that I'd like you to think about throughout the trial. Because I'm going to prove exactly what I'm going to tell you now. First of all, the Arvizo family is from Los Angeles. We are going to bring in witnesses to tell you about their behavior. For example, Janet and Gavin called comedian Jay Leno and tried to get money from Mr. Leno. Mr. Leno has told the Santa Barbara police something was wrong. They were looking for a mark. It sounded scripted. The mother was in the background, and I terminated the conversation. Comedian George Lopez was approached by Gavin and Janet. He was asked for money. He didn't want to give money, and then they accused him of stealing $300 from Gavin's wallet.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that statement. The court has a 403 ruling.
Sustained.
An actress named Vernee Watson, who has appeared on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and the movie Antoine Fisher, met this family at a dance school. As soon as she met Janet and Gavin, they wanted to move into her house and wanted money. She refused. A comedian named Louise Palanker was approached by Janet, told they needed money for medical bills and living expenses. She was not told that insurance was covering all the medical bills. She gave them $20,000, two $10,000 checks. She then went to the home to check out the room she thought she was contributing to redo for Gavin when he came home to heal. She knew of a builder who had gone to the home and redid the room. She found out the builder had been stiffed, not paid, and the money had been used for a huge TV and DVD player. And she was upset. This kind of behavior, we will prove to you, went on and on and on. Michael Tyson was approached. Efforts were made to reach Adam Sandler, Jim Carrey, a number of celebrities. And we will prove to you that the best-known celebrity and the most vulnerable celebrity became the mark, Michael Jackson. Who is Michael Jackson? You're going to learn a lot about him in this trial. Because Michael Jackson, as you know, has been the subject of so much speculation, so much false reporting, so much embellished documentary, so many shows for so many years, the question you're going to be asking is, who is he? And you're going to learn. You're going to learn that Michael Jackson was born in Gary, Indiana, in a large family, a very famous musical family. They didn't have much in those days. Michael Jackson had to work hard from the age of 5 to develop his musical talents and his musical genius, and he did so. He went to school, he came home, he did his homework. And instead of having the freedom that many young people had, he then had to rehearse, and rehearse, and rehearse. And on weekends, there were performances in various cities, Chicago, Detroit, and he worked very hard. And a success that you know about has come about through a combination of genius, and very, very hard work. Michael Jackson has often said, I missed some of my childhood. I didn't have as much freedom as other kids. I couldn't be as spontaneous, because when I wasn't in school and I wasn't doing my homework, I seemed to be rehearsing into the wee hours of the morning. And he's always taken an interest in his own childhood and how it relates to the world, his career, and his life. The prosecutor has presented to you a picture of Neverland. He purchased Neverland in 1988. It's approximately 2,800 acres in Los Olivos. The prosecutor presented a picture of Neverland being some haven for crime, some lure for despicable conduct. It is not. Neverland was created by Michael Jackson for a number of reasons. If you go into Neverland, you are struck by the childlike, Disney-like, fantasy-like atmosphere. You'll see statues of children, boys and girls playing in various ways. You'll see a train. You'll see a lake. You'll see a zoo with elephants and giraffes, with tigers and all kind, alpacas and all kind of animals. You will see a theater. You'll see rolling hills. And you'll see an invitation to play and be childlike. And as I think you already know, children come there all the time. Most of them inner-city children from poverty, drugs, violence, problems. They go there for recreation. It is an invitation for them. You will also see the main street named after his mother. You will go into the main house and see beautiful antiques that he has purchased, and you will see pictures of his beautiful children and his family all over. Some of them painted, some of them photographs. He created Neverland for particular reasons. He felt that his childhood had been somewhat deprived by all the work I just described. And he wanted a place where children, particularly these kinds of children from the inner city with problems, could come and have fun and be free and spontaneous, innocent, have a wonderful time. He did it in honor of his family. As I said to you before, the main street's named after his mother, whom he loves very much. He did it because this is where he wanted to live. In this community, in this fashion. And that's why he chose Los Olivos. It could have been anywhere in the world. Michael Jackson met the Arvizo family because he was contacted and told a young boy had cancer and wanted to meet him and needed his help. And unlike others who spelled the ruse, he didn't. He contacted the child. They talked on the phone. He sent toys and favors to the family. The mother was extremely eager to meet Michael Jackson. Because we will prove to you, the mother, with her children as tools, was trying to find a celebrity to latch on to. They were trying to find a celebrity to create their life and give them advantages they didn't have. And they were looking far and wide for that celebrity. And unfortunately, for Michael Jackson, he fell for it. That's where it all begins. Now, Michael Jackson, you will learn about in court. You will learn that the person who's not on stage is really a very shy person, a very private person, a person who in some ways shuns the limelight when he's not on stage, and a person who has chose to live his life as he wants to live it, based on his background, what he thinks he was deprived of, and his dreams. He has written of the importance of dreams, not only as a creative process, but as the basis for living your life. And he has tried to do that at Neverland. And Neverland, we will prove to you, is not a haven for criminal activity, a lure for molestation, a magnet for crime. It is none of the things the prosecutor tried to tell you it is. We will prove that in this case, Michael Jackson wanted to help Gavin Arvizo. He let them come to Neverland. He sang songs to Gavin. His parents were around, his brothers and sisters were around, and he tried to help Gavin in ways he thought might work. The child was described to him as having very serious cancer, as having had rounds of chemotherapy, various organs removed. He was told, Michael, that is, that this child was on his last legs. He took him around Neverland. He showed him the animals. He showed him the kind of Disney-like atmosphere that he thought and believes and knows children like. He did things that were unusual. Michael is a voracious reader. He loves to read books and all subject matters. He has close to 1 million books at Neverland. And he tried to use techniques that he had read about to help cancer patients. For example, he asked Gavin to envision he's playing Pac-Man, and the cancer cells are being gobbled up by the good people. He had gotten that from studies of visualization techniques that were perfected in England years ago for cancer patients. Their theory is that if you will visualize and imagine in your mind a way to beat a disease, if you will visualize the good cells going after the bad cells, they're sometimes described as fish, the good fish eating the bad fish. If you will visualize healing, if you will visualize through imagery how you can beat a disease, the studies show it sometimes succeeds. And he taught that to Gavin. He taught him to climb trees when he was well. He did the kinds of things his mother and father had asked Michael Jackson to do. He took a lot of time away from his career to help this child and help his family, never knowing that the trap was being set. And I'm going to tell you how the trap was set. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to prove to you in this case that there is a pattern by Janet and her children of ensnaring people for money. First of all, the prosecutor alluded to a deposition where he said she admittedly lied. He didn't tell you the details. Let me tell you some of them. Janet Arvizo sued J.C. Penney in West Covina in Los Angeles County. She was living in Los Angeles with her family at various locations, which will become important, and I will tell you why. She claimed that she was the victim and her children were the victim of battery, false imprisonment and infliction of emotional distress. This was in July of 1999. Almost a year later, she amended that complaint to add sexual assault by a security officer. What did she say the security officer had done in the J.C. Penney public parking lot? She said her breasts were fondled, her nipple was squeezed 10 to 20 times, she was punched with a closed fist by a J.C. Penney security guard, she was molested in her vaginal area, and she was called racial slurs. That is the case where she was testifying under oath. That is the case where the prosecutor says she lied. She has admitted lying in that case. Her son was ill. The lawsuit was settled. The family got a total of $152,500. That's the Arvizo family. Janet Arvizo's ex-husband, David, says Janet coached her children in that case what to say. A witness named Mary Holzer, an employee for a law firm that represented Janet Arvizo, Gavin Arvizo, Star Arvizo, and David Arvizo in the J.C. Penney case, has come forward to testify that Janet admitted she lied. Let me take this a step further. Miss Holzer says that Janet said her husband had a cousin in the Mexican mafia, and this woman says she never came forward because she feared harm. This is the first pattern I want to identify for you with respect to this family. Let's go to the second example of this pattern. On December 18, in the year 2000, in the deposition in the J.C. Penney case, Janet Arvizo said her husband David never assaulted her. She now says she was assaulted for 17 years, every year of their marriage. On September 29, 2001, Janet Arvizo told the Los Angeles Police Department she was assaulted by David Arvizo, her husband. Less than a month later, she filed for divorce. Exactly a month after she filed for divorce, she filed a welfare application that said her husband had assaulted her. And incidentally, we will prove the $152,000 I just talked about never appeared on her welfare application, and that application was under penalty of perjury. On November 26, 2001, Janet Arvizo told the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, for the first time that David Arvizo, her soon-to-be ex-husband, molested her daughter 12 years earlier. She had never raised that allegation before. Again, she claimed false imprisonment. She said she was the victim of terrorist threats. And she claimed that her ex-husband had willfully harmed her children. The allegations against Michael Jackson are the third claim of false imprisonment she has made. They are, by our count, approximately the fourth claim for sexual assault she has made. On November 26, 2001, Davelin Arvizo, parroting her mother, claims her father physically abused her brothers and threatened to kill her mother. Ladies and gentlemen, we will call witnesses who will tell you that Mrs. Arvizo in the past often says people are trying to kill her. On November 26, 2001, Janet Arvizo filed a copy of an arrest report on her husband with the Social Services Agency in Los Angeles to expedite the aid, the public assistance she wanted. That's the public assistance that she applied for without disclosing assets, bank accounts, the J.C. Penney settlement, and other things she had, and other things she was required to disclose. And I repeat, those forms are under penalty of perjury. In the current case, she claims that her former husband, David, struck her and the children for many, many years. As the prosecutor suggested to you, she's claiming that she's the victim of a whole lifetime of abuse. What he didn't tell you was that she also claims other relatives are in the drug business and abused she and her kids as well. Let me tell you a little bit about the evidence that we're going to present to you about her efforts to get money from celebrities by claiming she's destitute, when she's not. You have heard a description from the prosecutor about that little apartment in East Los Angeles, where that furniture allegedly came from, that he says Michael Jackson somehow wanted to arrange to steal through others. I guess the implication is that Michael Jackson needed her furniture. That was a studio apartment in East Los Angeles where her family had lived from time to time, but generally not often. That was a studio apartment which had a few furnishings, was sparsely decorated, looked like it really hadn't been used because, for the most part, it wasn't. For the most part, she lived with her parents in El Monte. And when she became engaged to her current husband, she moved in with him in the family. But when she wanted celebrities to contribute money to her, after she told them her son had cancer, and they were destitute, and they needed money for medical bills, guess where she took them? The studio apartment in East Los Angeles. She kept it even when she was living in other locations. Her husband worked at Vaughn's. He was a Teamster, and he had all the medical benefits the Teamsters provide, including full medical coverage. Gavin was treated at Kaiser Hospital on Sunset in Los Angeles. There were no co-payments. There were no deductibles. His medical expenses were paid in full. But Janet Arvizo put into effect a program to take her son and try and use him to obtain money. She approached the Mid-Valley News, an El Monte newspaper. She said she couldn't pay her son's medical bills. She told them it was $12,000 per chemo treatment. Those treatments were being paid by the insurance company. She asked them to help her raise money. She wanted an ad in the newspaper. They did put an ad in the newspaper. But she was kind of squirrely about the account, because the people at the newspaper said, if it's for your son, and we are raising money for your son, you have to have an account in your son's name. And she said, we will prove that she went to one woman to help her set up the account. This woman's sister was an attorney and offered to help. This woman wanted Gavin's social security number. Janet said she wanted an account with her name on it, and we will prove to you eventually. She found a clever mechanism for doing this. She set up an account in her name, with she being the signatory, and she said it was for Gavin's benefit, and she put money in the account and she withdrew money from the account. The people at the newspaper will tell you that they were so moved by the story of Janet and Gavin, that they brought her a turkey on Thanksgiving Day, thinking they were engaging in an act of goodwill, good fortune. They knocked on the door. Janet answered, and was upset. She didn't want a turkey, she wanted money. On June 15, the year 2000, Janet received $10,000 from Mrs. Louise Palanker. I mentioned her. She's a comedian and an actress who used to hang out at a place called the Laugh Factory in Los Angeles. Janet Arvizo wanted her children to be actors. She made no secret about that. And she took them to acting school in Los Angeles. They performed at the Laugh Factory. The check that Mrs. Arvizo received from Louise Palanker was then deposited into Janet's mother's account, so she didn't have to disclose it to welfare authorities and didn't have a paper trail that they actually had money as she made and pursued her efforts to con people out of funds. On June 10, 2000, David Arvizo, her husband, received $10,000 from Mrs. Palanker again. Mrs. Palanker will testify that she was told they were destitute. They needed it for medical bills and living expenses. On July 19, 2000, almost a week after she hid this money, Gavin requested to meet Michael Jackson. Now, there's a bit of a dispute over exactly who contacted Michael Jackson first, because a hairdresser friend of his, Carol Lemire, has indicated that she arranged the contact through Mr. Jackson's assistant when she heard about Gavin. And she learned about Gavin because her son was at the same dancing school that Gavin was at, a dancing school at Olympic and Fairfax in Los Angeles. That is the dancing school where Janet approached actress Vernie Watson and asked for money and wanted to move in. Michael Jackson learned about this child's illness and was very upset and very concerned. He arranged for a gift basket, toys, to be sent to the hospital. In August of 2000, August 27, the Arvizo family first came to Neverland. And again, that was all part of Michael Jackson's attempt to help a family, he was told, was destitute, with a seriously ill child. By all accounts, during these early months, the Arvizo children were pretty well behaved. Nobody seems to have had a problem with them on the premises. That later changed, as I will explain to you in my opening statement. On September 21, 2000, the Arvizos visited Neverland. They enjoyed the rides. They stayed over. It was the whole family. The mother, the husband, and the 3 children. The mother stayed in a particular guest quarters at Neverland. This is the guest quarters where she later claims she was falsely imprisoned. It is a beautifully decorated room that Elizabeth Taylor and Marlon Brando always requested when they visited Neverland. It is one of the most beautiful rooms you'll ever see. She says she was falsely imprisoned there on a future date. She also says that she was prevented from knowing time, couldn't see a clock anyplace. Prevented from just determining when she could leave and not leave. You will learn in this trial that overlooking Neverland, on one of the most prominent hills with one of the most prominent views of Neverland, is a huge clock. It's lit at night. It's prominent in the daytime. You can't miss it. To the right of that huge clock is another huge clock. And throughout Neverland are clocks, many of them with a Disney-like type of style to them. Big, ornate clocks. In the fall of 2000, just as they were visiting Neverland, they hustled Jay Leno, George Lopez, and weatherman Fritz Coleman in Los Angeles. I've explained to you the approach to Jay Leno, who, by the way, doesn't associate with Michael Jackson at all. And he told the Santa Barbara police something was wrong. The conversation was recorded. They got on the phone. Mr. Leno says, "I'm actually easier to reach than a lot of people think, particularly if I hear somebody's in need." It was Gavin calling him, not Janet. But he said, "I could hear the mother in the background. And the way he approached me, saying, 'I love you, I watch you late at night,' suggested to him something was wrong." And he terminated the conversation fairly quickly. He told the police they were looking for a mark. I already mentioned the problem with George Lopez. See, the Laugh Factory is a magnet for comedians in Los Angeles. Many have started their careers there. And accomplished comedians like Jay Leno and George Lopez once in a while like to drop by again, and they maintain their contacts in the world of comedy. Fritz Coleman is a newscaster, a weatherman in Los Angeles, very well known. He was approached by Janet and Gavin Arvizo. Janet told him her son was seriously ill with cancer. He arranged a fundraiser at the Laugh Factory. And we will prove to you that as you entered the Laugh Factory for the fundraiser, there was Gavin with his hand out in the lobby, with Janet prodding him on. Now, the Laugh Factory is owned by someone named Jamie Masada, who was mentioned in the prosecutor's opening statement. Masada claims that he's the one who contacted Michael Jackson to talk about Gavin. We believe Carol Lemire, but they both make that claim. When questioned about where the money went, Mr. Masada first said, "Well, we delivered it to the hospital. But the hospital has no record of cash being paid, because you didn't need to pay anything. The Teamsters insurance policy paid every medical expense. Fritz Coleman doesn't know where the money went either. It has disappeared in thin air. Where do you think it went?" This was the time when they accused George Lopez of ripping off $300 from Gavin's wallet.
Your Honor, I'm going to object again.
Sustained.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to.
That's twice.
In October of 2000, Janet, through Gavin, approached Michael Jackson and said, "We have no means of transportation. We're poor. We can't do it." And Michael gave them an SUV. We will prove to you that Janet didn't want her name on the registration, because she never disclosed it in her welfare applications and other requests for public assistance, including disability. Nor did she itemize her disability income on her welfare application as required. When she met with the police at a later date, one of her major complaints was she wanted her car back. The car was severely damaged. No one knows exactly how. There are varying stories about it. It went back to Neverland for repairs. And one of the first things she said to the police were words to the effect, "Where's my SUV?" Janet Arvizo never directly went to Michael Jackson and asked for money. She always used Gavin and the children. They were always coming to him and saying, "We need this, we need that. Can you help us?" And they were helped. Not as part of some criminal conspiracy to abduct a family, imprison a family, extort a family, molest a family, intoxicate a family. They were done because he had concern for what they had told him and he had concern for Gavin's health. 1 month after Michael Jackson gave the SUV to the Arvizos, that incident with the El Monte newspaper happened. I just told you about the turkey. Her request to an ad. She was very angry at the publisher, because the ad about her family needing money didn't mention the Washington Mutual bank account. She expressed her anger on numerous occasions that they hadn't put the name of the account to deposit money into. That's the account where she had the argument about Gavin's social security number. On November 29, 2000, the El Monte newspaper reported that it was costing the Arvizos $12,000 for treatment of chemotherapy. All of that was being paid by the Teamsters insurance. In late 2000, you had the fundraiser at the Laugh Factory. You had a number of fundraisers at the Laugh Factory. Where the money went, nobody knows.
Counsel.
Yes, Your Honor.
Can we take a break?
Yeah.
Mr. Mesereau.